Hi, Karla. Welcome to Awaken and Align. So good to have you here.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I already talked to you on the phone that I'm such a huge fan of yours. I've been following you since 2020, so
Really?
I believe it was 2020 or 2021. It was like at the height of, I would say, the BLM and all of
Okay.
and not that it's over, not that it like just began during that time, but I think that's how I found you.
Yeah, I think it was because I had done a couple of videos right after the killing of George Floyd, and that's when I think things kind of um, started to snowball. And I think the one thing that I love about social media, especially TikTok, there's things I don't like either. Let's just be honest. But I love the algorithm that brings us together. I really do appreciate how, okay, you want to see this, and then that's what I'm gonna show you. And I love how that's been able to create this community where we're finding each other. So yeah.
And what a breath of fresh air you are. Because, you see Rev Karla and, just there's so many judgments you can make about your appearance, but then you have these fun, really lighthearted sometimes videos of you just being this ally and advocate, and the things that you share are just like, wow, we need more people like you.
Yeah, my tagline should be not your typical boomer. Um, because I do believe that in some ways, especially now that I've accepted the grayness of my hair and just have gone for it. I believe that, not that I'm so rare um, that there aren't other creators out there or people, allies who are from the boomer generation, but we can also, it's undeniable that a lot of what's happening is often coming from stemming from people who are so entrenched in that thinking that they don't their identity is their values and what they've been taught, what they've been indoctrinated into. And I totally get it because I was there. I was really there. So I understand it from both sides, but so grateful that I did the work to deconstruct from it.
So actually, I'm really curious about like your history, your origin story. How did you become a minister? And I guess where are you from? Like, and how did you start deconstructing all of that?
Well, I am definitely a child of the 60s, and I'm definitely a product of the Midwest. I was born in Kentucky, primarily raised in southern Indiana. So, definitely the Bible Belt, and spent the majority of my summers in Kentucky. So I'm a product of both regions. Still consider the bluegrass state God's country. It's a beautiful state. I was raised Southern Baptist, and I credit my grandmother for instilling that desire, that longing for something out there bigger than I am. Even though they also say that you can find breadcrumbs in your past that lead you to the point where you were deconstructing, even as indoctrinated as I was. And I, looking back, even at 9 years old, I've been telling this story recently. I have this vivid memory of being in um, worship Sunday with my grandmother and watching, being so captivated by this minister and knowing I could not only do that job, I could do it better. Like I listened to the pastors at 9 years old. I went to adult Bible study. Whatever it was that was happening within me was happening really early on. And if the church doors were open, we were there. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday Bible study, we were there. And back then, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have all the other things to do, and even social gatherings were planned around church settings. You didn't have softball games or anything like extracurricular activities on Sundays because you kept that away from the Lord's Day, or Wednesday night because most families were in church and that was the priority at the time. That was my childhood. But I can remember sitting there and listening to the pastor and thinking, I want to be that. And I'm hearing I can be whatever I want, to dream big, but you can't be that. because the Southern Baptists do not ordain female women ministers. So that deconstructing was happening, even though I very much was still a part of that tradition for many years up until my adult life. And so for me then, I started to navigate through Christianity, not because I was church shopping. I'm really quick to point out, because this is where I have a lot of people who are following me to see where they can trip me up so they can grab what I said, go make a blog about it, say, see, she's a hypocrite. I'm not being a hypocrite. Any place that I went, I just knew I was looking for something that I was not finding in the church I was at. And where I went, I did the work. We were faithful leaders. We tithed. We dove into the study in the same way. So yes, we went through different denominations. In some of them, I was an ordained elder. I was always immersed in doing the work, thinking, okay, this is it. Until I finally realized that this creator being that I was calling God at that time, I was being put in too small a box inside my Christian experience. And for me, that was really terrifying, but I was starting to come to grips with it, because my last church was even a Pentecostal apostolic experience. And I'm not sure if you're really aware of that, but that is where everything is whereas Southern Baptists might take things from a very literal perspective. You're really entrenched in a patriarchal system that not only adheres to church leadership and authority, you're looking to them for who you're dating, for your job. They are involved in every aspect of your life, and that's very intentional to keep that kind of control over you. And even when I was a part of that and being obedient to it, I was sneaking off to go listen to Bishop John Shelby Spong. And I don't know if you know who that is, but that's an Episcopalian bishop who for years started to deconstruct the religion heritage, to show that what scholars, this scholarly research that he did for years to show how many errors in translations there have been, how you can connect to this story of Jesus outside of the dogma of religion. And I was fascinated by him. And the first book I read of his was called Christianity Must Change or Die. And I hid that book because I thought, if anybody sees me reading this, I am going to be in big trouble. I think my husband knew it, but I would hide it. And there was part of me too that felt like I was condemning my faith, but I was being called to something. So finally, after this, we're talking years now. I'm almost at that point. I was approaching my 50th birthday. I'm 61 now, and people will also mock me about that, to say, why did it take you so long? Unless you have been indoctrinated into a patriarchal system that impacts your religion, your education, your familial experiences, do not judge anyone who has to deconstruct from that, because you are looking at uprooting every one of your systems. Your entire contact list is going to change. Your entire life is going to change, because once you start to deconstruct one, the whole structure of your life is going to start to fall apart, fall away. And that's exactly what happened for me. And then I began that journey, which at first I thought was, okay, I'm going to go into leadership, but it will be part of the Christian heritage. But no, I wasn't done. I knew I needed to study. So I started at a biblical college. I'm like, well, wait a minute, I know this stuff. I've been reading the Bible since I was 6 years old. So then I went to world religion studies at Arizona State University online division. And my first class was Intro to World Religions, and everything fell off from that point. But I was literally on the ground crying, because I needed that to really, that's it. I knew that stuff had been kept away from me, because you are loyal to your educational experience, which says you only look to the pulpit and you're spoon-fed from the pulpit. But when you start to see outside of that and you start to receive that, it was that earth-shattering. It felt like everything that who I was had just completely fallen away. And it's true, it did. It fell away from me. And that from there, shattered, literally shattered on the floor with no roadmap, no one to talk to. I started to build myself back up because I was not giving up. I was not giving up hope. I wanted to understand how people experience spirituality and how they understood the this creation concept, the mystical, how are we connected and how people understand it throughout the world. And that was my journey. That is how I was what I was committed to from that point forward. And that's what kept me going until I ended up in seminary, and which was not my typical Christian seminary at all. I went to interfaith, interspiritual. Interfaith says that you can, there's wisdom in all world religions. Interspiritual says that spirituality can and does exist outside of organized religion. And it's not contained in, no religion has the ability or the right to hijack anyone's right. So that's how I ended up here. I had no idea what I was going to do with my ordination, but because I had amazing mentors that were helping me through this, because I was healing from trauma, I was deconstructing my religious heritage. I knew I was being called to help people. I just didn't know what or how. And one of my mentors said, "You are going to help people once you've walked this path." And I'm angry. Like, what do you mean, what path? I don't even know what path. I can't see anything here. I'm just a broken mess. She just kept saying, trust the process, trust this process. Things will start to make sense. And yeah, 11 years later, it's made sense. And so here I am. And I heard the call to come to TikTok. I'm like, all right, this feels like a spiritual nudge. Let's go have fun.
Yeah, and what a time to do what you do, because I feel like, especially TikTok, and I've felt this for a really long time about TikTok. The consciousness level on TikTok is way, I don't mean to say higher is better, but like I feel like people are so much more attuned on TikTok and aware than they are on the other platforms, and are ready for this kind of information. And it clearly is resonating because you have like almost 600. You're right there, 600,000,
I
right? I think
I
it's
am. It
599.9.
yeah, it could happen today. It could happen today. It's not that it hasn't happened yet. And I try not to hyper focus on those numbers, but it feels, that still feels surreal. That still feels surreal to have that kind of following, that my message resonates with. And it is an honor. I see it very much as an honor to have that many people who are listening to what I have to say, and in my DMs and emails all the time thanking me for my work.
Yeah, because that's why I resonated with you, because I also grew up Christian but Presbyterian, and went to Bible study, church camp. Um, I went to a Catholic college and studied like Jesus, and like I was indoctrinated into that whole system. But I consider myself to be now, non-denominational, just inner spiritual person. And I've always wondered if there were other people like that out there. And of course, like I see you and you sharing your wisdom, and I'm like, yes, there are more people like us out there. And you already answered one of the questions that I had, is what can you be spiritual without being religious? Can you be religious without being spiritual? And I think you already answered that, but do you want to speak more about that?
So, yeah, I'd like to talk first about what you said about the non-denominational and interspiritual, because I think that's such an important topic for people, and that kind of leads to the being spiritual but not religious, and a little bit about deconstructing. But I think where we're all going, and I love, especially now where we are on our spiritual journey, where so many of us are collaborating, and the debate isn't what you believe. And I'm finding that so much. I don't know. There's a group on TikTok called the New Evangelicals, and it's run by Tim, and we do not align, theologically, if you will, but
Mhm.
we've never had that question. We've never had that debate, nor do we feel the need to, because there's a higher purpose for our coming together. And I feel like that is where spirituality is going. And why it's so important to not make that the hyper focus, because a lot of what we see happening sometimes is when I want to oppress you with what my beliefs are, then that's where we start to see religious oppression start to become the focus of so many people's agenda. That's just how they see their spirituality showing up, is how they feel so morally or spiritually superior to other people that they feel like that's how they show up. And then the whole non-denominational and the inner spiritual, I think that's a beautiful intersectionality that a lot of people don't necessarily recognize in what you just said. Well, first of all, I also want to tell you that I was an ordained elder in the Presbyterian Church, and that was one of my favorite experiences. I left that church to we were called the Frozen Chosen, so I can call myself that because I was that as well. But I needed to understand what this whole immersion of the Holy Spirit felt like. I had not had an apostolic Pentecostal experience, and that's what I left the church to try to explore, to find out if that's what was missing in my spiritual quest, if you will. So hats off to the Presbyterians. They're doing great work. But so this, and then deconstructing, when, like you said, that you have a Christian heritage, and obviously your beliefs have changed for you to embrace this intersection of inner spirituality. But deconstructing isn't necessarily, it's certainly not about proselytizing to get people to a certain point. Oftentimes religion will try to be like, well, here are the 10 things that we require of you for you to be considered a good Christian, a good faith abider, or whatever their label is around it. But it's really more about what do you need to peel away that has not allowed you to embrace your spirituality. Because I do believe for each one of us it's different, and so if you can figure that out and then return to a spiritual community, whether that aligns with your beliefs, that helps you, that connects you, that enriches you, that helps you connect to the divine source, then that's what I think religion should be. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think that holding space for people who are on a spiritual but not religious path, which is where I am, I call myself, it doesn't fit on a business card, but I call myself a spiritual but not religious person, but I'm also a non-conforming, unchurched Christian, because I've done the work. People, you are not taking that title away from me. There's when I have done what I have done on behalf of Christianity, and what I still try to seek because of my religious heritage, I just refuse to lose that title or that identity, because it means so much to me, and it also honors my grandmother, who even in her last years of life who was a staunch Southern Baptist all of her entire life. And I even think about what a great minister she would have been had she not internalized the patriarchy in which she could only see herself existing in that kind of environment. She had no choice. But I always think, oh, she would have been a great minister, so much more so than the others. I often feel like I'm finishing her work. But I think that's what being spiritual but not religious is all about. And you can be spiritual and not religious and still be in religion. Mm-hmm. It's more about the mindset. Yeah. When this human-made construct of religion should not be to create a bucket that's exclusive just to your community. It's how we work together in humanity.
So I have a question. At the beginning of what you just said, you and Tim of this other faith, you don't even get to the point of like questioning each other's beliefs, even if you don't agree, right? But this is where I have issues with some religious beliefs, is because religion in the United States has been weaponized to colonize people,
Yes.
separate people, and now we're in this weird, like alt-right church state in our
Hmm.
government. And so if we don't question their beliefs and maybe the morality of it, like their beliefs are what's creating laws that are oppressing us. And
Hmm.
if our morals don't align, then these very people that we're not questioning are like governing us. So what do you say about that?
Oh my, that's a great distinction, and thank you for letting me have the opportunity to explain that. When I was talking about Tim, Tim is one of the most vocal on TikTok right now when it comes to holding the space for some of his evangelical beliefs, which I've deconstructed from fully. He's holding the space for that, but also calling out the people who have weaponized their beliefs to justify the continued oppression of the historically oppressed, and those who are basically the ones who are entrenched in Christian nationalism, who believe in dominion theology, which basically says that a white Christian men should be in power and no one else's ladder will ever reach the top. So anyone who's supporting that, who's not white Christian male, is internalizing that patriarchy because they hope that their ladder goes up far enough that they don't get splashed by some of the oppression of the others. They either believe it in themselves that that person belongs, or they're just trying, they have selfish intent and they're just going to try to climb to the top and they don't care who gets kicked off the ladder. Either way, it's very dangerous and it's very toxic. And you know from my own content that I'm calling this out
Mm-hmm.
all the time. There can be no reconciliation. There can absolutely never be any reconciliation with a person who is weaponizing their religious beliefs to oppress others. Human rights should always take precedence over religious beliefs. And you can never, you will never convince anybody over here who's speaking out against that, that you can justify your sanctimonious beliefs and say that that is of your God. It will never be reconciled, ever. And however you want to try to contort history or contort scripture to make that happen, you are also contorting it to serve your needs, when what history really does is show us time and again that people did just that. They justified the enslavement of humans. They justified suppressing women's rights. They justified what the civil rights backlash in the 60s, right before we got the Civil Rights Acts of 1964, because of religion. They had no problem whatsoever terrorizing their Black neighbors on Saturday and raising their hands on Sunday morning to praise their Jesus. And that can never be reconciled in any way, shape, or form. So to that, we're going to be in this battle for a while, and I hate to use words that can sound very conflictual. I'm not sure if that's the word.
Mm-hmm.
But the tension's going to continue for a while. This will not stop after the midterms. We're going to be on this road for a while to return to a place where human rights do take precedence over religious beliefs, because we're not near where we should be. Not in a democracy of America's size and might. We're nowhere near where we should be. And when we become complacent, even on the liberal blue side, even when we become complacent, this is where you get. So we have to create a system to ensure that nothing like where we are right now ever happens again. So I hope I made that very clear, that I'm making a distinction between, when I talk about beliefs, I'm talking about people who are fighting against religious oppression.
Mm-hmm. Their whole like belief system also comes from a book, right? The Bible.
Yes.
They're like, this says this and blah 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 blah. But my understanding is that this is a version of a Bible that left out a lot of parts, like I feel like it was edited for the purpose of their, patriarchal um, lens and control. Um, I don't have like evidence of this, but I've accumulated because I studied the Bibles like for my whole life. So I've always wondered like where are the women? Women aren't just mothers and whores, and where are all the like revolutionaries like Jesus? And why is it written like this to make us afraid? Do you have any like source that you work with to like counteract like the people who are like, well, this is written in the Bible, this is what Jesus says?
Yeah. So John Shelby Spong is a really good person to read. Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism is a wonderful book about doing just that, lifting the Bible out of that those translations. Bart Ehrman, Ehrman, he wrote a book called How Jesus Became God, and he also talks. He has a blog, but it's behind a paywall. Mm-hmm. But he has a podcast as well, where people read his blog, volunteers read his blog, and so you can actually listen to these blogs. And he talks a lot about the weaponization of scripture, and he also talks about the origin of scripture. And it was somewhere around, I'm going to paraphrase some of what I learned from him, but it was somewhere around the 7th century when people started, the world was expanding enough, they started to intersect, that they started to see like, well, wait a minute, I'm over here copying this manuscript, which I thought was the Bible, and I'm over here copying this manuscript, and I thought this was the Bible, but they don't match. Mm-hmm. And they started to compare where they don't match because no one had the entire manuscript. So some of it was filled in, some of it was assumed, some of it was intentionally left out. It depended on who was in power at the time and what agenda they had, that created the translations that made its way up to us today. And so one of the things that I find one of the most laughable, even though in my religious heritage, is when people say, well, if it's not King James Version, it's not the Bible. Are you kidding me? A Bible that was written in what, the 1600s? Mm-hmm. We're talking almost 2,000 years after the birth of Jesus is the real Bible, because we believe that a gay king who had the right people translating it gave us the version of our Bible, which is the most accurate. And if they knew the real history of King James, would they really want that? The only reason why it's considered the most authentic is because it reinforces patriarchy, unlike any other version of the Bible that there is. So Bart Ehrman, John Shelby Spong, Reza Aslan, Rezaslan is another wonderful resource. He wrote Zealot, which is the other story of Jesus, which is another great book. There is a wonderful resource on TikTok. If you are not following Dan McClellan, and I think it's Maclelan, if you spell something like that. So this is a Brigham Young professor. So let me tell you, for my own little suspicious triggers at the beginning, I'm like, what's he up to? What's he up to here? Why is he out here telling us this stuff? There's got to be an agenda behind this. So I know my own triggers are like, white male, talking about the Bible. I don't know if I'm going to trust this dude. And then one day I find out he's following me, and he's referred people to me. And I went, okay, he's the real deal. He's the real deal. And he breaks this down in ways that you can really understand it. And the other thing I appreciate about Dan is people who are out there who are in this literal fundamentalist world view of the Bible. Oh, honey, he's going to cut them off at the knees. And so he'll just go neck to neck with them. He'll play a clip of their video, and he'll be like, okay, let me tell you why this is so wrong and inaccurate. And he goes right to the scholars. He goes right to the research. He just did this on a video with Jordan Peterson, which I truly enjoyed for a number of reasons.
Oh,
So
that's
I don't know if
exciting
you
to
want to get
watch.
into Jordan
Yeah.
Peterson. I love that. I saved it because I'm gonna duet it because I thought, yeah, that's good.
And actually, now that you brought up Jordan Peterson, how do you like what are your observations with this new age spiritual community that don't have like I just saw your face that are like not affiliated to a religion, which is fine, but like I don't know, like what are your observations? Just curious.
So I will preface it by saying that somewhere around, I'm at my daughter's house right now, but somewhere around here, I'm sure I have crystals and I have some essential oils and I have my yoga mat over here that I do and my place where I meditate and my journaling that I do, the things that ground me, the practices that I do that sustain me. Um, but corruption, spiritual manipulation, spiritual abuse, people seeking to be someone else's guru is not just um, singular to Christianity or Catholicism or anything else. It runs the rampant of the whole gamut of spirituality. And you will find the same kind of corruption and deceit inside every one of those areas of discipline, if you will. And my biggest concern, and I follow some new age spiritualists, and I'm mutuals with some, the ones that I respect that I feel like are doing more education than, and also doing empowerment and things like that in a way that I feel like their ethics are true. Um, and I've got caught with a couple of them where I've had to unfollow them and block them when I go, oh, wait a minute, I didn't see that coming. And I'm very one and out when it comes to that because once people show me their true colors, I'm out. But I think you have to be really careful. And the one thing that any religion, any discipline can become a dogma. Any place can become a dogma. It can create conditions. It can create judgment. It can be also part of a system of privilege that detaches you from the pain of the world. And instead of, yes, you can become so centered in developing yourself that you forget that there is a world out there that we are supposed to be a part of. And, I'll be the first to admit that my spirituality is very entrenched in the way I show up in the world and how I help elevate the human condition. First and foremost, we as humans, that's how I feel why we're here traveling on this planet right now. But it becomes so self-centered that you forget the pain of your neighbor. And that can be just as dangerous as religion, which brings the focus inside for the very same reason. For the very same reason. So if you can focus about salvation on this end, and then I can distract you from the pain out there because nothing is more important than your salvation and the salvation of the person sitting in the pew next to you, so that you begin to think that the only thing you should be doing in the world is evangelizing to people to bring them to Jesus. And over here, your only purpose is to bring love and peace and harmony. And not that in some ways aren't important in balance. If your peace and harmony mutes your voice to the point like, oh, I can't look that way, that messes up my chi, then you have exchanged one dogma for another. And every one of us, especially those who have the skin tone of me, have a responsibility to deconstruct from our privilege and look at how we can be contributing allies, not just working on ourselves. We have a responsibility to help undo what has been done. And that's a trigger point for a lot of white people. I get it all the time. Anytime I do a video where I'll duet a person of color who is a Black, Indigenous person of color who's talking about you can't be racist. If you're a Black person, you can't there's certain, the word, and I'm not trying to be offensive to anybody here, but the word cracker is not racist. I don't believe it is. I think it's a learning opportunity, but those of us who are doing the work understand that we have no right to gatekeep how people express their pain. It's not the same. But when we're looking at New Age spirituality, we forget that work of being anti-racist, being deconstructing that privilege should be part of your spiritual journey instead of just worried about your alignments. And I'm not minimizing that. I do work on my breath work. I do work in sitting in stillness. I do all of that. I'm still trying to figure out some of these darn yoga poses that I still can't get after all these years. I always laugh when the teacher will say, and if it's available to you, your head should be touching your knees. I'm like, honey, my head is still looking at the lamp. It's not touching my knees. Okay. But so you do the work, and then you also do the work. So yeah, I've got strong opinions on that, as you can tell.
Yeah, and I think what you just said, it's like you can be in a cultish group, whether you're in a church or you're in like a new age spirit. I mean, I found myself in those situations so many times when I would like open my eyes one day and be like, I think I'm in a cult. And I need to get out of here, and it's the same red flags.
Exactly.
It's the same guru who's telling you can't do this, you can't do that, and these people are the problem, and you have to, purify your body, and all these like weird things that they start saying. And then one very big example is, so my parents are both obviously still Christian, but I think a few years ago they were like super Christians, and I think they've devolved over time, but they were really into Joel Osteen, like super into him. And I think it's because he was he was speaking and preaching about something that everybody wants to be, which is like being rich, right? Like monetarily. And when that hurricane happened in Houston, and the news came out that he didn't open up his church for people of color and people who were, didn't have homes or anywhere to go. And I said, see, that's a good example of like how some Christians preach about like being good to your neighbor, being like generous, but not actually acting upon those things. And it's like your actions need to follow your words, especially when you're a minister or whatever he is. I think he's a minister, a pastor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know the full story of that. I didn't like deeper, but I just feel like um, it was a red flag, in my opinion.
Well, let's talk about prosperity gospel, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
Because prosperity gospel is another one of those things that can run across the table of spirituality. And that, again, that goes back to this, what I'm here to receive versus what I'm here to give. And if we are living a life of balance, if you'll allow me, I can get a little mystical here.
Yes, please.
We can live a life of balance. And in that life of balance, it means in every aspect of our lives. So you can never justify, I'm going to just say it, there is absolutely no reason that Joel Osteen will ever need a $10 million mansion. Ever. In any way, shape, or form, can you ever justify a ministry being able to fund a multi-million-dollar mansion for one family to exist based on the income of his ministry? But what he has created in that, and I used to be a Joel Osteen fan too, watched it every Sunday with my little notebook, and I'm just going to take down every note because he's the master at those little tidbits that you could keep with you all day. Like, I'm favored, I'm highly favored, thank you, Jesus, I found this parking spot. I was all about it. But you can never reconcile a prosperity gospel that allows a person to get that rich off of ministry when the constituents who are funding it don't know how they're going to pay their next rent payment. They don't know how they're going to put food on the table, but they've turned that prosperity gospel message into, if I bless Joel, then I will get blessed in return, and continually doing that. My grandmother was a big follower of Oral Roberts. Do you recognize that name?
Oh.
So that's a blast from my generation. Oral Roberts was the Kenneth Copeland of the 60s and 70s, and the founder of Oral Roberts University, and very much a prosperity gospel person. He even said one time, if he didn't raise X amount of money on a Sunday, that God was going to call him home that day. And he raised 3 times the amount. Yes. And that's the kind of control he had on people. And my grandmother in her 80s sent me a $20 bill in the mail. And I said, what is this for? She goes, well, I was sitting there listening to Oral, and he said he needed every one of us to send him $20 to bless the college students. And she said, it hit me. Why am I sending this man money when I have college students in my life? So you could see my grandmother, she wanted me to send it to my brother. And I said, first of all, Grandma, don't send cash in the mail. That's what we don't need to do. But that was a level of deconstructing for her, like an awakening for her to say, I'm not doing this anymore because this is ridiculous. But that kind of mind, it's spiritual manipulation. Mm-hmm. There's no reason that Kenneth Copeland is the richest preacher in the world, or in the nation, with $300 million wealth. Now, we don't know for sure because churches aren't required under IRS law to show their wealth, but there are people who have researched him to say that his wealth is over $300 million. And yet he's asking people on TV who don't know how they're going to put food on the table to send that money. Those are the people who are funding him by far. That is not on any level ethical in any way, shape, or form. But they have created this prosperity gospel message to bless them in some way. I sat in church and heard it myself when they would say, I'm going to read a Bible verse to you and you say it back to me that I'm highly favored. And we had to say, that's for me. That's for me. Now, just as the blessing cup goes by, give us your money. And I'm like, this is crazy. And yet here I was, not believing it, but I this is all I knew. Mm-hmm. I didn't see life outside of my spiritual community. And I would listen to that nonsense, and we'd still put our check in there every week. So it's you are absolutely right that our actions, our beliefs should be reflected in our actions. And if there's not, then there is a conflict. And then going back, I kind of did a detour there back to the mystical. What I was saying is we need to look at that in every parts of our lives. If you're talking about living a balanced life, you can't live just on water. You have to have food. You have to have rest. You can't have a sedentary lifestyle. The body has to move, but that goes back into the inward as well. Mm-hmm. So we work on ourselves, but we also reflect that outward. So, a lot of times if I offer any kind of meditation or prayer, whatever words I need around it for the people I'm speaking to, I'll say, may I serve, may I reflect back to the world my highest good. So if I'm working on my highest good, then what I reflect back to the world is that. And not that it's like, yes, I'm offering a course right now that costs $47 because I have staff that I need to pay. But if you see me buying a $10 million mansion somewhere, then something's off here. And that is not going to be happening. I'm just trying to make payroll. But the point is that you have to look at your spiritual leaders through that lens. And some people are afraid to do so because outside of that lens, what do I have? Right. Where is my spiritual community? And that's why a lot of people are faking it in the pews right now, because it's easier to stay there with the known than to take the chance out there in the unknown. And even when at my lowest, thought that's exactly what I'm going to do, because I don't know what spirituality looks like out here. I'm just going to go back to church.
Mhm.
And boy, am I going to have to be humble when I go back, but I'll do it. And I won't cause any more trouble. I won't challenge the church authority. I'm just going to be quiet.
Mhm.
Obviously, that's not what I did, but I thought about it.
Well, I'm just hearing what you're saying, and I reflect back on um, even the last church that I went to right before the pandemic. I stopped going because the leader got caught in some shady shit. Um, and I remember like it feeling so good. Like even though I knew the problematic things that some of these leaders were saying and some things did not resonate with me, being in a sanctuary, singing songs together, being in community, like we are spiritual beings. Like that's what our heart desires. And it's almost like I had to turn that side off for a little bit. Like he's saying some problematic things, but like I really want this, you know? And what you were saying, it's hard to leave that because then you don't have that anymore and it's like, okay, now where do I go? You know? And it's really really sad, but I want to go to your course, the healing the religious trauma. And
Yes.
I know people can take your course, but like what is the first step?
Well,
Realize that
so
we have a problem?
yeah, and I think people don't even recognize that. It's not, obviously it's not a diagnosis yet with the DSM-5, which is part of the therapy community, but enough therapists are trauma informed that they understand that religion is part of that. It will eventually have its own diagnosis. So
Mhm.
it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just doesn't mean, it means right now that therapist hasn't caught up to the fact that religion has been causing trauma for years. And for a very basic definition, religion trauma is anything that has happened to you that inhibits your life now, the way you show up in your life. It inhibits you. You have lost your footing, your confidence, your courage, your voice, anything. Because of that experience, I will no longer do X. I will no longer believe X. I will no longer trust X. That is trauma. So
Mhm.
how do you work through that? We're all conditioned to think like, well, I no, it's not PTSD, and I didn't go to war. I didn't go, I have not been abused in that way in some physical sense, even though there are plenty of people who have been abused, physically abused in church. This is about recognizing it first and understanding that part of your journey, your healing journey. So this is not even part of your deconstructing, because it kind of, they can go together, they can go congruently. But part of your healing journey is understanding that more than likely there is something in your past that you need to heal from a religious experience. And when I bring this up on a live or any kind of talk, there's always somebody who'll show up and say, I remember when I was 5 and this happened.
Mhm.
I remember when this happened. My daughter on a live one time, she helps moderate said, I remember when I was 9 sitting, or was she 7? I can't remember. Um, an elder slapped her hands when she grabbed for the communion plate. And she said, I never wanted to take communion again because of that, because she was sitting by her grandparents who did nothing, because that's patriarchy. No one's going to, an elder had the authority to do whatever he wanted. And I was enraged. But the truth is, if I had been sitting right beside her, I wouldn't have done anything either. I know that. I know that about myself. And that terrifies me, but it's the truth because of that patriarchy.
Mhm.
So people have those experiences that you don't realize are stopping you from reclaiming your spirituality, from you being able to stand in your spiritual truth, your authenticity, and reclaim it. And people are like, well, what is that? What does that even look like? Because we're so many of us, we just kind of gave our spirituality away and said, as long as we're doing these, checking off this list every week, we're good. We're spiritually good because we did the things that the church said that we need to do, instead of really nurturing who we are. So once we start to understand that this is something that we've always been able to handle, and just like our fingerprints, it's different for each person, then we can start to heal from that and then start to grow this, to grow into who we are. and to understand that some of what, whether you want to call it intuitiveness, I mean, that's like, ooh, that's woo-woo-y, but that's spiritual, those spiritual nudges and those burnings, those things that you all of a sudden you're seeing on TV, a commercial, and you're bawling your eyes out.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting cues all the time of what you're here to do. We're ignoring them because they did not fit the indoctrination from which we came, or we were told we're back there that that's not worthwhile, or we didn't have the right outside of our religious indoctrination or our familial or educational indoctrination to tell us, like, no, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. You're not good enough, smart enough, bright enough. All of that leads to trauma upon trauma upon trauma that says we're not good enough, fast enough, bright enough, smart enough, passionate enough to do that. And so you break out of that mold. And so understanding how patriarchy works, and then the steps that you could start to take to heal from it. And that's what we'll be talking about in this course. And it's one of the most common requested courses that I get. How can I work with you, Rev Karla? And can you do more to help me with deconstructing and healing religious trauma? Those are the top 3 that I get all the time. So I've done it. I've created the course.
Yeah. And as you were speaking, like, even just the predatory nature of like religious leaders sometimes, especially the male ones, and like there's something there. I don't even want to go down that deep dark hole, because like with the priests and the Catholicism and all of that, like, and how that's like infiltrated our culture. But I feel like all of us has been impacted in some way by religious trauma, whether you have gone to church or not. Like, it's in the psyche of our collective.
So I just did a video about this as well. The way patriarchy will work too is that it will apologize for itself when the perpetrator cannot be held accountable, and the person who's doing the apologizing can be seen as a white savior. And you can go back to even before, just starting with Joan of Arc, who we know was burned at the stake, and then 20 years later was found absolved of heresy, and zip up to Galileo, who died under house arrest because, God forbid, he showed that the universe did not revolve around the earth. He was arrested for that. It took 350 years. 1992, he died in the 17th century. 1992, before he was absolved of being a heretic. 350 years for the Catholic Church to say that he was not a heretic and apologize. Well, enough time had gone by that the Pope now looks like a white savior instead of holding the people accountable. And this pattern happens all the time. And even those stories are intentional. Those stories inside patriarchy are intentional, because don't expect anybody to be held accountable for anything that they do. The people of God are above you, and don't question their moral or spiritual authority over you. They have the right to be there, and your victimization will be silenced in order for that person to remain in power. You just saw it with the Southern Baptist Convention. So yes, the Catholic Church has its record of abuses and still have priests in power who we know have knowingly abused. And somewhere down the line, this pattern will continue, where you'll have like the Pope showing up in Canada to apologize for the Indigenous Native children who were wickedly dehumanized and terrorized under the power of the Catholic Church. And everybody agrees that his apology didn't go far enough, but how convenient to wait until after everyone had died. That actually perpetuated those oppressions, those abuses. Then you have it now showing up at the Southern Baptist Convention, and that damning report that came out this year that said, yeah, all of those, you were right. You were right. But boy, look at us now. We're doing everything right. We just got all this together. But back then, they knew they were covering up the abuses. over and over again, patriarchy shows this. So you take that indoctrination into your life, you lose your voice. So even if you're not directly impacted by that victimization, you're witnessing on what happens to people who are victimized. And that it convinces you that who are you to have a voice in this, because that's exactly what's going to happen to you. So all of it's intentional.
Yeah. And I just have two more questions. Do you ever fear for your safety because you are kind of going against a big institution?
Well, thank you for asking that. Yes, I do. I had somebody recently text and say, "Oh, I see you're in," and name my city. And I immediately went, "How did you figure that out?" Yes, I'm in Indiana. I mean, that's easy to talk about, but I don't share where I am because of that. I mean, if people want to be a sleuth, they could. I do take protection. I do things on a personal level to take care of myself and my family. Um, but I also know that to be silent is not an option.
Right.
Because as a white person, it would be easy to be convenient to say, well, I don't want to be hurt. But then I think about the historically oppressed who are constantly hurt. And I say that from a place of almost embarrassment that it took me this long to use my voice, when I know, and I've seen it even in there places in Indiana where um, we're a total red state. I mean, come on, we were the first one. The poll closed at 6, and at 6:01 we announced that Trump won our state. I mean, I think we were the first in the nation to announce, yeah, okay, we know what Indiana is. They went for Trump. There aren't people who are safe to walk on the streets. We have sundown towns in Indiana. They in the 70s had the billboards that said, "Do not be caught in our town after sundown if you are Black, Indigenous, or people of color." And they did not use those words in the 70s. I was a teenager, and you do not want to be there now. You do not want to be there now. You have story. I want to be careful so I don't show where I am, but there are towns right now where I would worry for your safety if you were there at night. And so that to me is what keeps me going. I'm still free to move around, and that because I'm steeped in my white privilege, and that allows me to do that. But yes, I take precautions to watch myself and
So
protect
I should
myself.
strike out Indiana for places to visit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And don't forget, the only reason that absolutely do not. And I'm not, they'll never hire me for the visitor bureau here, because I would tell you, do not come here. Do not.
Yeah, at least not at night by myself.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. So last question, and I don't even know how to phrase this question because you are Rev Karla. What is your message to the world? Like, if you were to tell people about God or how this universe works, or like a message of inspiration, what would you tell people?
Well, I will tell you that after all the years of study that I did, and I studied, besides studying the Bible since I was 6 years old, I was in adult Bible study. The 6 years that I did for the work, my seminary work, and becoming ordained, having peace with knowing less and claiming that as my spirituality, it feels like a paradox, but it's actually the most liberating part of who I am. But having deconstructing from deconstructed from most of my religious beliefs, I do believe that we are moving towards a kinder and more compassion. We are still evolving. And whatever this creator source is that brought us all into existence does exist in some kind of form, but our human understanding is so limited that maybe someday we'll evolve to understand it, but we're not there yet. I do believe we came here working in cooperation with that divine existence, and we're here to have this human experience with the laws of nature and the things that happen here based on choices of the people who are traveling with us. And I consider that source love. And I believe when we leave here, that is what we return to. And the conditions surrounding that heaven-like existence or whatever it is, that if I focus on that, then I lose attention for the work I should be doing here. That to me is, who has time to romanticize that when so much is happening here that could truly impact humanity. So we work for the good of the whole, while we know we're here for a short while and we came from love, and to love is where we will return. And that's as close to a sermon as I get. I do have love the opportunity to talk about that sometime, but that is it. I'm going to return to that from which I came, and that is love.
Well, if you want to listen to Karla's sermon, you could follow her on TikTok. I mean, amazing content. Thank you so much for showing up and for blessing us on this community. I mean, I feel so lucky that you started following me and so I could DM you. And I'm just so privileged to know you. So thank you so much.
Well, I feel the same. I really do. And thank you for the time that you've given me. You've given me some wonderful advice that helped me on my journey. And I'm honored to be in this space with you, to be able to talk. Your questions were amazing. And it reminded me, it's always good for me to hear back what I have to say and be reminded why I'm here and doing the work I'm doing. So thank you so much for your time, and love to you and to all your listeners.
Thank you.